Why was her hand trembling again? Sarah Martinez loaded her Glock 19, but the slide felt heavier than she remembered. Not physically, spiritually. 3 years since she'd worn the uniform, but her body still moved like it was on patrol. Automatic, efficient, silent, only this time, something was off. A soft tremor snaked through her fingers, barely visible, but she could feel it. It had started weeks ago, and it hadn't let up. The indoor range was loud, echoing with half-hearted shots and hollow confidence. College kids in the corner laughing too loud. A businessman beside her performing like he was on a magazine cover, not realizing his rounds were carving up nothing but drywall. The Glock felt cold in her grip. Alien, unfamiliar, a stranger's weapon. First shot, wide left. She didn't curse, didn't grunt, just felt her jaw tighten. That tightness used to come with discipline. Now it came with shame. Back in Kandahar, she'd once put 15 rounds through a target the size of a playing card in the middle of a dust storm. She remembered the wind, the adrenaline, the silence between shots. Now she couldn't even center a paper silhouette at 25 yards. The man in lane 3 smirked at her. A soft chuckle, just loud enough. Rough day at the office? She said nothing. Didn't look. Just let the silence carry her focus. But she could feel the humiliation creeping in like a tide. She wasn't here to prove anything. Not to them. Not anymore. She was here to remember, or to forget. It was getting hard to tell the difference. She loaded another mag. Her hands moved by memory. Check chamber, slide forward, side picture. But the tremor was there. Not a flinch, not nerves, something else, something deeper. 3 weeks ago. She'd still been working with veterans, physical therapy at the VA in Denver. Her hands had been her pride. Healing hands, calming hands. Then Marcus happened. A young Marine with a missing leg and memories too loud to drown, mid-session. He'd grabbed her wrist. A reflex, a flashback, his eyes gone somewhere dark. And for a single terrifying moment, Sarah had reverted. Combat training fired off. Her hand had flown to his throat. She caught herself, just in time, but not fast enough. Not fast enough to stop him from seeing it. The other side of her, the killer. He'd pulled back, terrified. She'd apologized. They'd offered her leave. But the tremor had started the next day, and it hadn't stopped since. She raised the Glock again. Her breathing slowed, deep, shallow. Inhale. Exhale. Just like SFC Rodriguez taught her. The weapon doesn't make the shot. Martinez, your mind does. She fired. Outer ring again. God, what was happening to her? Beside her, the businessman laughed under his breath. Jesus, lady, maybe try a bigger target. Still, she said nothing, but inside, something coiled. Something that didn't forget what it was. Back in Afghanistan, they'd called her Ghost because she never missed. Because insurgents who saw her work whispered stories about an invisible force in the mountains. Because Sarah Martinez had turned death into geometry. A calculation, a breath, a heartbeat now? She was just another woman at the range, trying not to break down in public. A brass casing from lane 9 shot toward her face. Reflexively, she deflected it midair with the back of her hand, never breaking stance. She hadn't even looked down. In lane 12, a man watched her. Steel gray eyes, silent, still, observing. A commander's eyes. Commander Jake Sullivan knew combat posture when he saw it. And that woman in lane 3 wasn't here to practice. She was here to remember what she used to be, and what she was trying not to become again. Her grip, her reloads, her muzzle discipline, all perfect. The kind you didn't get from YouTube or civilian training. It was military. Tiered, practiced, deliberate. Jake felt his chest tighten. The way she handled the Glock, even with the tremor, reminded him of the kind of operators who could end a standoff before a threat realized they'd been made. He looked at her hands, saw the shake, but the rest of her? Steady, focused, broken, but holding. Something in Jake stirred recognition, a memory that hadn't left him in years. He watched her fire again, then again, still wide. But her breath was combat breath, measured, deliberate, training level. Stillness, that wasn't civilian. That was combat, real combat. Jake took a breath and stepped forward. He didn't say anything, just moved into lane 4 beside her, pretended to adjust his gear, loaded his own weapon slowly, clumsily, put on a show of warming up. He missed on purpose. Let the magazine clatter to the floor. She didn't flinch. Then, without looking, she kicked the mag back toward him with the edge of her boot. He caught it, said, "Thanks." She nodded curt. Respectful, professional, the nod of one warrior to all. Another. And that's when Jake knew she wasn't a hobbyist. She wasn't just broken. She was a legend. Why did his voice sound like it remembered her? Sarah loaded another magazine, the motion crisp but weary. Her hands still trembled, a tremor she'd tried to ignore, tried to fight, but in her chest, something had shifted. The man next to her wasn't just another range tourist. She'd seen the way he moved, too deliberate in his fumbles, too casual in his glances. He was testing her. But she wasn't ready for the final test. He'd said it softly, just loud enough to breach the hum of the range fans. "Nice shooting, Ghost." She froze. The word detonated in her chest like a breach charge, blowing open doors she'd sealed shut years ago. Ghost. Not ma'am, not shooter, not Martinez. Ghost. A name that only existed in sealed files and whispered debriefs. Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't look at him, not right away. Her instinct screamed run. Instead, she drew herself inward, built the wall back up, the one that separated Sarah the therapist from Ghost, the sniper. One kept people alive with kindness, the other with velocity and silence. But it was too late. The man next to her had seen it. The fracture in her, the tell. Sarah turned slowly. His face was composed, still, but not blank. His eyes, gray, focused, studied her with a precision she knew too well. Tactical precision, the kind that didn't ask for permission. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, carefully. Flat tone, no inflection, no truth. But the lie barely held. She could see it in his expression. Not doubt, but recognition. And then she saw it just above his left eyebrow. A scar, thin, clean, old. Her blood went cold. She'd seen that scar before, magnified through a scope, on a man coordinating movement through a valley in Afghanistan. She'd kept him alive. He'd never seen her face. But she'd watched his team extract while she held the high ground. "Reaper 6, she whispered. The man nodded, slowly, a breath caught in his throat. "You saved my team," he said. She wanted to deny it, needed to, but the truth was written all over both of them. It hung in the air like cordite. It wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't just a scar. This was the man whose life had depended on her scope 2 years ago, Commander Jake Sullivan. Now she knew. She backed away slightly, almost imperceptibly. The way someone steps from an edge, her hands were trembling again. He said her name, not Ghost, her real one. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez. The sound of it cracked something inside her. She looked down. The Glock was still in her grip. She holstered it, tight, secure, like locking away a dangerous truth. Her voice dropped low, nearly a whisper. "How?" Jake's reply came measured. "Operation was compartmentalized," he said. "Your name was blacked out on every report, but I remember your voice. I've never forgotten it. The way you called out our corridor, the way your shots dropped bodies we never even saw." Sarah felt the words slice through her defenses. She'd spent years pretending Ghost never existed, pretending she was just a physical therapist with a few scars and a steady paycheck. But here, in the middle of a fluorescent-lit civilian range, her secret had found her. Not to haunt her, but to thank her. "Your team?" she asked softly, her voice fragile. "They made it?" Jake's nod was slow, reverent. All of them, Rodriguez. Head injury, recovered. Kowalski made Master Chief. Martin married his nurse. They're all alive because of you. Sarah blinked. The shots she'd fired in that valley weren't abstractions. Anymore, they weren't just angles and math. They were people, names, futures. She swallowed hard, fighting back emotion that had nowhere to go. I never knew. She whispered. They debriefed me, and that was it. No follow-up, no reports. I didn't even know if you made it out, Jake nodded again, quieter this time. That's how it works. We'd disappear into the next stop. But I never forgot that night. You were alone on Overwatch. Everyone else was dead or pinned, and still. You gave us cover like you had a whole fire team up there. Sarah's hand drifted to her wrist. The bracelet she wore wasn't decorative. It had 43 notches, each one carved with quiet, reverent guilt. 43, she said. Jake frowned slightly. Confirmed? He asked her softly. She nodded. His voice lowered even further. Then, that's 43 men who never hurt one of ours. Sarah stared at the floor. That wasn't how it felt. It never had. It didn't matter how many lives she'd saved. The only thing she saw at night were the ones she'd taken. Jake stepped closer, just close enough for his voice to reach her ears, and no one else's. I tried to find you. Couldn't. They said you were classified beyond my clearance. But I promised myself, if I ever got the chance to say this. He paused. Sarah met his eyes. Thank you, he said. 2 words, simple, but they hit her harder than any I'd ever had. All this time, she'd carried the weight alone. The guilt, the silence, the tremor, the fear of who she might become if she stopped pretending. But now, here was proof that Ghost hadn't been a monster. Ghost had been a shield. You're not broken. Jake said, as if reading her thoughts, you're carrying something no one else can see. But I see it, and I respect the hell out of it. Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't need therapy right now. Didn't need meds or debriefs or checklists. She needed this recognition, truth, a moment of real human connection between warriors who had walked the edge and somehow returned. When she opened her eyes, Jake was standing at attention. Then, without a word, he raised his hand. Not the quick nod of soldiers at the PX. Not the casual salute of a passing officer, but the full, formal, ceremonial salute. The kind reserved for the fallen and the legendary. His hand moved slowly, deliberate, reverent. It said more than words ever could. And Sarah, trembling, returned it, not because of protocol, not because of duty, but because something inside her had remembered who she was. The Glock was still in its holster, but her hands were steady now because Ghost had been seen and forgiven. Why had she let him see her? Sarah stood in silence, her hands still raised in salute. The kind of silence that doesn't belong at a shooting range, sacred, suspended. Around her, the world had stopped pretending. The college kids in the back had stopped joking. Even the smug businessman wasn't smirking anymore. He just stared at her like she was something mythic. She hadn't wanted this, didn't ask for it, and yet, part of her, the buried part, had needed it. Jake's salute dropped. Slowly, respectfully, his eyes still locked on hers with that same unflinching intensity. Then he turned and walked away without a word, leaving behind a wake of stunned quiet. Sarah exhaled. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath. The tremor was still gone, but her heart was racing. Not from adrenaline, not the kind she'd felt while under fire, but from something harder to manage. Exposure. Someone had seen her, not the therapist, not the steady, calm presence behind a rehab table. No, he had seen her, Ghost. The thing she had locked away, the thing she sometimes dreamed would take over and never leave. She holstered her Glock, packed her range bag with mechanical precision. Everything had its place. Everything had a reason. She'd learned that in sniper school, how order was the only thing that stood between control and chaos. Jake's words still echoed in her head. You're not broken. You carried something no one else could. They felt like lies, beautiful, dangerous lies, because she was broken. She just learned how to function around the cracks. But maybe, no, not yet. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit. Then she heard his voice. Wait. Jake stood by the coffee machine, civilian, calm, but his posture still screamed military. You didn't lose that after 23 years in special warfare. I don't mean to intrude, he said, but I think we should talk somewhere quieter. Sarah hesitated. She shouldn't. This was a bad idea, the kind that led to memory holes and emotional collapse. But when she looked in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in anyone since Kandahar. Understanding, not sympathy, not pity, but the shared, haunted recognition of someone who'd carried bodies, buried brothers, and watched entire versions of themselves die overseas. Coffee? He asked. She nodded once. They walked 2 blocks in silence to a small diner off Colfax. It was mostly empty. Just a waitress prepping for the night shift and an older couple in the corner, who looked like they'd been arguing since the Cold War. Jake ordered black coffee. Sarah didn't order anything. Her stomach was a clenched fist. You probably have 1,000 reasons not to be here, he said gently. I get that. But let me start with this. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a coin, military challenge coin, custom-made, not standard issue. He slid it across the table. Sarah stared at it. It was his team. The call sign, the date, the seal. She touched it with 2 fingers, like it might burn her. We had these made after that deployment. Jake said, every man on the team carries one. I've carried mine for 2 years. And I told myself that if I ever found you, the real you, I'd give it to you. Because we don't exist without you. Sarah blinked, but the tears still came, quiet, unwelcome but honest. I never expected this, she said finally. Jake nodded. I didn't either. I didn't come to the range to find a legend. I came because I couldn't stand my walls anymore. Civilian life has too much quiet, too much pretending. Sarah almost laughed. Tell me about it. There it was, a crack, not a fracture, not something broken, but a crack where light could get in. Jake leaned back, watching her like a man who knew how to wait out a sniper's hide. You know, he said after a beat, we have this myth about people like you. Operators talk about ghosts like she's folklore, like you weren't real, the way you moved, the way you fired. People think you're just a story. Sarah nodded. That's the idea. But you are real, he said softly. She looked away. I don't know what I am. Jake waited, then said, that night in the valley, do you remember what you said over Combs? Sarah's voice cracked. I said, I've got your 6. Jake smiled, but it was sad, like the memory hurt in a good way. You didn't hesitate. Not once. We were pinned, wounded, dying, and you never flinched. I've never seen anything like it. I did hesitate, she said. I was alone. I was supposed to wait for support, but I couldn't. Jake leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. You did what no one else could. You saved 8 lives with 10 rounds. Do you know how impossible that is? Sarah didn't answer, because she did know. She had the wind drift numbers memorized. The distances, the angles, the faces, and she also remembered what it cost her. She remembered the last shot. The insurgent sniper on the far ridge, the one targeting the medevac chopper. She had to shoot through a patch of trees, guessing at trajectory 1 inch off, and the bullet would have caught a branch. She made the shot anyway, killed him, saved the aircrew, but afterward, she couldn't speak for 3 days after the mission. She said quietly, they pulled me out, black boxed the whole thing. No debrief, no medals, just silence. Jake nodded slowly. I've seen that happen. When the government doesn't know what to do with someone that good, that dangerous, they bury them. Sarah gripped her coffee cup, and I let them. No, Jake said. You survived them. She looked up. That hit harder than she expected. He leaned back, voice softer now, more like a brother than a SEAL. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Martinez. She opened her mouth, but no sound came, because she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the monster wearing a human mask. She looked down at the challenge coin, brushed her fingers over the engraving. Reaper 6, October 15th, 2022. Never forget. I never told anyone. She said, not the VA, not my family. They all think I just did rehab. Jake's voice dropped to a whisper. Well, I know, and I'm not going anywhere. The clock ticked. The diner buzzed faintly with static radio. Outside, the city kept moving, uncaring. But inside that booth, two people sat across from each other, not as strangers. As survivors, as warriors, Sarah finally spoke. I still hear the shots sometimes, she said. Not the ones I fired, the ones I didn't. Jake didn't interrupt. He just nodded, because he understood. And that understanding might just be enough to keep her from falling apart. How many lives do you save before you lose your own? The coin was still in her hand. Sarah kept running her thumb over the engraved lettering, as if the ridges could anchor her to something solid. But nothing had felt solid in years. Not since she came home. Not since she stopped wearing the uniform and started pretending she didn't miss it. Jake sat quietly across the booth, watching her like someone who wasn't afraid of silence. That's what told her the most about him, not his posture or his bearing, or even the fact that he knew her call sign. It was the silence, the patience, the understanding that some conversations take time. Some wounds don't scream. They whisper Sarah's. Voice was low when she spoke. I didn't think you were real. Jake blinked. That day I heard you. I saw your team. I watched that ambush unfold like a goddamn nightmare. She said, but I never knew if any of you made it. I definitely never thought I'd be sitting across from one of you two. Years later in a Denver diner, Jake smiled softly. Fate's funny like that. No, Sarah said, shaking her head. Fate doesn't bring people like us back together. Guilt does, or debt. Jake nodded, not arguing. There's more, Sarah added. Jake didn't speak. He waited. I didn't just stop because the army told me to. I broke after that mission, after Kandahar. Her fingers tightened around the coin. I started seeing their faces, not yours. Theirs, the ones I killed. Every time I closed my eyes, they were closer. Jake lowered his head. I had to do a psych eval a month later. She continued. I passed. Of course I did. I knew the boxes to check, the lies to tell. But the truth? The truth was, I couldn't feel anything anymore. Not really. Except when I was on the trigger. That scared the hell out of me. She looked up. Her voice was shaking. I didn't stop because I lost my edge. I stopped because I lost myself. Jake exhaled slowly. You ever think maybe that was you finding yourself? She scoffed. Finding myself? As what? A woman who can put a round through a coin at 900 yards, but can't stop shaking in a grocery store line. Jake leaned in, elbows on the table. As someone who made it home alive, who chose not to be just a weapon, who didn't let the war define her. Sarah didn't answer, because what if she had let it define her? What if she still was the war? She looked out the window. I thought I could disappear, she said. Just be normal. Blend in, work at the VA, help people. But Jake finished it for her, but Ghost never left. She nodded, and there it was, spoken out loud for the first time in years. Ghost was still there, still inside her. And the harder she fought to bury that part of herself, the more the tremor grew. Maybe it wasn't her body malfunctioning. Maybe it was her soul asking to be seen again. Jake looked down at his hands. They were calloused, rough, years of warfare mapped into skin. His voice dropped. You know what I miss most? Sarah shook her head. The clarity, the purpose. There was no gray out there. You had a job. You protected your team. You made the call. He paused. But no one tells you that coming home is the murkiest battlefield of all. Sarah stared at him because, yes, that was it. That was the thing she hadn't been able to explain. Not to her therapist, not to her family, not even to herself. The battlefield had rules, horrible ones. But rules? Civvy life? None. Just masks, apologies, pretending. You weren't scanning every room for threats. You ever sleep on the floor? She asked suddenly. Jake chuckled. Every night for the first year. I still do, she said. They both smiled. It was the first real smile she'd had in months. Jake studied her carefully. Sarah, listen, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not gonna give you some motivational speech or try to convince you to come back to the world. He paused. But I will say this. I don't think you're broken. I think you're just unresolved. That word landed heavy. Unresolved. Like a rifle not zeroed. Like a shot just off center. Sarah's hand moved to her range bag. She pulled out the printout from earlier. Her target. 3 perfect shots. Dead center. From when she'd closed her eyes and stopped fighting Ghost. She pushed the paper across the table. Jake stared. That's you, he said. Sarah nodded. When I stopped trying to be something I'm not. Yeah. Jake didn't look away from the paper. That woman? The one who fired those rounds? She's not a monster. I used to think she was, Sarah whispered. I used to think I had to choose between being her or being human. Jake looked at her now. Really looked. You are human. You just happen to be the kind that runs toward. Gunfire. Sarah's eyes welled again. Not with pain this time, with something else. Maybe forgiveness. Jake stood. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something else on the table. A folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was a list of names, his team, their statuses, where they were now, who had made it home. She held the list like a holy object. This is why it mattered, Jake said. In case you ever forget. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Ghost, he said, turning back. If you ever want to talk again, not about war, just about life, I'll be around. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. And that, for now, was enough. What if she wasn't meant to let go, but to learn how to hold it differently? Sarah sat in the booth long after Jake had left. The challenge coin was still in her hand. The paper with his team's names rested under her fingertips. A kind of silence had taken hold of her. Not the dead, heavy kind that came after trauma, but the kind that settles in right before something changes. She stared out the window. Cars passed. People laughed. Somewhere down the street. Someone honked twice in anger. Or excitement. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Out there, the world was spinning. Fast, normal, loud, and she was just still. For the first time since Kandahar, Sarah felt like she had room to breathe. Not because anything had been fixed, but because someone had finally seen the cracks and didn't flinch. He'd seen Ghost, and instead of retreating, he'd saluted. What does it mean to be human, she thought, when you've been more weapon than woman for half your life? That question lingered as she walked home. The Denver evening was cool, the kind of air that whispered of approaching fall. She passed families on stoops, men smoking outside bars, a woman pushing a stroller and humming to a baby that would never know what war meant. And still, the tremor didn't return. That night, Sarah didn't sleep on the floor. She tried the bed again. She didn't dream of insurgents. She dreamed of her spotter, Rodriguez, laughing under a torn-up tarp during a monsoon. In Helmand, she dreamed of the moment before the shot, that infinite breath when everything goes still. She dreamed of stillness, not silence, in the morning. She opened her laptop and typed a name. Jake Sullivan. Nothing. Just as it should be. People like him, like her, didn't leave trails unless they wanted to be found. She smiled. A real one. Maybe. That's the point. She thought, maybe we're not supposed to forget. Maybe we're supposed to carry it. But differently, at the VA that afternoon, She moved slower, not weaker, more deliberate. She noticed how some of the veterans avoided eye contact, how others laughed too loud. She saw them now, not just as patients, but as mirrors, and maybe they could see her too. One of them, a Marine named Lee, who hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, handed her a drawing. It was simple, crude, a figure holding another figure on a battlefield. Blood in the dirt, no face, just eyes, steady, calm, unafraid. She didn't ask who it was meant to be. She didn't need to. Later, as she loaded her gear into her car, she found herself driving back to the range. She hadn't planned it, but her hands moved on their own. This time, she didn't care about the businessman or the college kids or the noise. This time, she was there for one reason: to integrate, not to suppress. She unzipped her bag, laid out her weapon, loaded her mags. The Glock no longer felt like a foreign object. It felt like a part of her, not because she needed it to feel powerful, but because she no longer feared what she could do with it. She stepped to lane 3, her lane, and before the first shot, she closed her eyes. The wind in Kandahar, the voices on the radio, Rodriguez's steady breathing in her ear, then silence, then breath, then fire. She opened her eyes and fired 3 rounds. Center mass, perfect triangle. Then she fired 3 more. Then 2 to the head, Mozambique drill, clean, efficient, unforgiving. The range went quiet around her. Again, it wasn't just the accuracy. It was the stillness, the kind that didn't belong to someone training for fun, the kind that came from someone who had once held lives in her hands and knew how easily they could slip through. The range officer approached her quietly. He'd seen her before, but not like this. Back again? He asked. Sarah nodded. No tremor today. He looked at her target, looked at her hands. No tremor today. And something in his tone told her he understood more than he let on. She packed up without ceremony, just efficient, practiced movement. But as she turned to leave, someone else stepped into her path. An older man, grizzled, former Marine, from the looks of it. He held something in his hand, a business card, plain. That government issue. Commander Sullivan said you might come back. The man said. He left this, said you could reach him if you ever needed to talk. Sarah took the card slowly, no name, just a number. Handwritten. She didn't speak, just nodded once. The man saluted her. This one wasn't slow or ceremonial. It was quick, a salute between equals. And then he turned and walked away. Sarah stared at the card. She didn't know if she'd call, not today, not tomorrow, but maybe someday. Not because she needed help, but because some battles aren't won by being alone. She stepped out into the fading light, Denver glowing with sunset haze. The range doors shut behind her. The coin was still in her pocket. The scars were still under her skin, but the tremor was gone. And Ghost? Ghost wasn't some monster waiting to take over. She was a part of her, a shadow, a protector. Not something to bury, but something to honor. Sarah looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. Not a sniper breath, not a survivor's breath, but a human one. Can you ever come home when part of you never left? The next morning, Sarah walked into the VA, not as a therapist, but as something more complete. She didn't speak differently, didn't act differently, but something had shifted. Her steps were quieter, more grounded, like someone who had stopped running and started returning. The air in the clinic smelled the same, disinfectant, coffee, and grief. But today, she could breathe it in, because today, she wasn't pretending. She still wore the mask. That calm, professional face she'd learned to perfect over the years. But behind it, Ghost stood beside her, not crouched in the shadows, not clawing to break through, just there, integrated whole. She passed Marcus in the hallway. He looked up from his wheelchair. Their eyes met. He didn't flinch this time. Neither did she. Sarah knelt. "Hey," she said gently. "How's the leg?" Marcus blinked. Then, slowly, He smiled. "Hurts like hell." "Good," she replied. "Means it's healing." They didn't speak more. They didn't have to. He no longer looked at her like she might kill him, and she no longer looked at him like he was a threat. The past was still there. That moment of fear. That terrible half-second when she nearly struck. But it wasn't louder than everything else anymore. She stood, walked past him, and didn't shake. That afternoon, she worked with a new patient. Navy, left arm gone, shrapnel scars along the side of his face. He hadn't said a word in the intake session, just stared through people as she walked in. He didn't look up until she said quietly, "You still sleeping on the floor?" His eyes darted to her, startled. She nodded. "I used to stack pillows against the wall, pretend it was cover." He didn't smile, but something in his eyes changed. Recognition, maybe even trust. "I can't go to grocery stores," he whispered. "Too many doors." Sarah sat beside him. "I used to track every exit. Still do sometimes. It gets better." He looked down at his lap. "I don't know how to be here," he said. "Back here." She placed her hand over his. "Maybe you don't have to be back. Maybe you just learn to be." Both. He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away later when he left the session. She caught her reflection in the glass of the therapy room window. No uniform, no rifle, but still a soldier, still Ghost, and Sarah. That evening, she stood in front of her apartment mirror, pulling a small wooden box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside, old patches, a Ranger tab, a unit coin, a folded piece of fabric still stained with dirt from Afghanistan, and one worn photograph, her and Rodriguez, just before their last stop. Both smiling, both alive, she stared at it for a long time, then opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a second box, this one smaller. She slid the photo in, then added the coin Jake had given her, the one with the names. She wrote one word on the lid with a marker. Both. She didn't need to choose anymore. The next day, a letter arrived, handwritten, from Jake. No return address, just a folded note in the same clean military cursive she remembered from supply manifests and mission packets. "Martinez, thought you'd want to know. Rodriguez is being promoted next month. He asked about you. Didn't know if you'd want to reach out, but I figured it was worth passing along. He said something I wanted you to hear. Tell Ghost that some of us made it because she never missed, but we stayed because she came home. Be well, be whole." Jake. Sarah read the note 3 times. Her throat closed. Rodriguez, alive, still out there, and remembering. Not just the kills, but the return. She sat on the edge of her bed, the letter in her lap, and let herself cry, not because she was broken, but because she was healing. The hardest part wasn't the war. It was remembering who you were when the war no longer needed you. And now she remembered. Not in full, but enough. That night, she returned to the range one more time. Lane 3 again. Same stance, same gear, same breathing. Only now, her hands weren't trembling because they were fighting something back. They were embracing something forward. She didn't shoot for practice. She didn't shoot for performance. She shot for peace. Slow, deliberate. And as each round punched through the center of the paper, she didn't hear the screams anymore. She heard. Breathing, rhythmic, grounding, alive. Then, when the final round clicked, she holstered, packed her gear, and turned to leave. She didn't notice the new young shooter beside her watching in awe. Didn't notice the range officer whispering, "She's back." She just walked out into the night, and this time, she wasn't haunted. She was whole. What do you do with a gift you never asked for, but can't return? The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah sat on her apartment floor, her back against the wall. Phone in her hand, Rodriguez's number lit up the screen. Jake had sent it the night before with a simple text. "He's ready if you are." She stared at the digits like they might detonate. It had been years since she'd heard that voice. Years since she'd heard him calling wind speed and elevation, whispering crude jokes over comms to keep her steady. Years since the day she found what was left of him in a crater outside Jalalabad. Blood pooling under his helmet, she'd buried him in her mind that day, because that was easier than calling, easier than admitting she'd survived what he hadn't. Only now she knew he had. She'd just never called to find out. Her thumb hovered over the dial. She pressed it. 1 ring, 2, 3, then, Martinez? Came a voice, quiet, deep, familiar. She didn't speak at first. Then, yeah, a pause on the line, a breath caught. I was starting to think you were just a legend someone made up, Rodriguez said. Sarah closed her eyes. I thought you were dead, she whispered. Sometimes I was. It replied silence. Then they both laughed, not loudly, but enough, like oxygen returning to lungs, like ghosts finally leaving the room. I heard you saved the SEAL team without me, he said. I did, she replied, but I almost didn't. Come back from that one. Rodriguez didn't ask why, didn't need to. Tell me, he said instead. And she did, everything, the tremor, the flashback with Marcus. The shots at the range, the moment Jake saluted, the silence afterward, and when she finished, Rodriguez's voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I'm glad you're still breathing, he said. Are you? She asked. Even after I didn't call? Rodriguez didn't hesitate. You were my spotter, he said. You called my shots, pulled me through the worst nights of my life. If disappearing for a few years was what you needed to survive, I'm not going to hold that against you. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. I missed you, she said. I never stopped waiting, he replied. And suddenly, something inside her eased. Not everything, not yet, but enough. That weekend, she returned to the range. Not alone. Rodriguez walked with a limp now, but he carried himself like a Marine who still had something in the tank. His right eye twitched when the rifle cracked, but he never flinched. They set up next to each other, lane 3 and lane 4, just like it used to be. Remember what I told you? He asked, loading his mag. Wind doesn't care about your feelings, she smiled. And I told you feelings don't help you group center mass. They laughed. The kind of laughter that tasted like blood and gun oil and healing. Rodriguez fired. First, decent group, a little high. Getting rusty, Sarah said. I lost my good eye. He shot back. Excuses. Her turn, she squared her shoulders. Focused, breathed, 5 rounds, dead center, Rodriguez whistled. Damn. I thought the rumors were exaggerated. They were, she said, setting her pistol down. I'm better now. He looked at her, not with awe, not with fear, with something. Better, recognition, respect, still ghost? He asked. No, she said, then. Yes, then, both, Rodriguez nodded, like he understood, because of course he did. You think you'll ever go back? He asked quietly, to the field? No, he said. To yourself. Sarah stared at the target. The clean holes, the empty mag, the stillness in her chest. I think I'm already on the way, she said. And that was the first time she believed. Later, they sat in the parking lot, windows down, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. You remember that night on the ridge? Rodriguez asked. The last one? Sarah nodded. October 15th. Yeah, I still dream about that one. I stopped, she said. Last week. Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. First time in years, she added. What changed? I let myself remember what I saved instead of what I destroyed. He stared at her a long time, then smiled. You always were the better shot, he said. But you always called the wind. And we both came home, he added. They didn't say anything after that. Just sat there, alive, present, together that night. Sarah walked back into her apartment and opened the box labeled both. She took out the coin, the letter, the patch, the photo of her and Rodriguez. Then she added one more thing. A printed target, the one from earlier that day, her best group. In years, she wrote 2 words across the bottom. I'm still here. Then closed the lid. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe, honored, whole. When do you stop fighting the war and start living what it protected? The sun was low in the Denver sky, golden and long, stretching shadows across the sidewalk like memories. Sarah walked slowly down 16th Street, hands in her jacket pockets. Eyes steady. For the first time in years, she wasn't scanning rooftops. She wasn't tracking exits. She wasn't holding her breath. She was just here, present, whole. It hadn't come easy. It hadn't come fast. And it hadn't come with fanfare or ceremony. It had come in silence. In tremors, in gunpowder, in names on a coin. In the quiet voice of a man who remembered her, not for what she did, but for who she was while doing it. It had come in pieces, but now, those pieces were hers. Not just the uniform, not just the name. Ghost, but Sarah, daughter, soldier, protector, healer, all of it. She stopped outside a storefront window, the same one she used to glance at every morning. The one where her reflection never quite matched who she felt she was inside. This time, it did. She looked older, sharper, but there was softness now, too. Not weakness, grace, behind her. A group of ROTC cadets walked past, laughing, full of youth and confidence and ideas about glory. One of them glanced at her, did a double take. She saw the way his eyes narrowed, assessing, not disrespectful, just curious. He wouldn't say "id," but she knew the look. It was the look of a young warrior who'd just seen a ghost. She gave him the smallest nod. He nodded back. Then he walked on. That was enough. Inside her apartment, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The box marked "Both" rested on the table nearby. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Everything in it lived inside her now. The coin, the photo, the paper target, the ache, the pride. It was all part of the same soul. Once, she'd tried to lock. In a way, now, she wore it like armor. Not to fight, but to face. There was no battle today. No mission. No blood in the dirt, just a quiet morning and a woman who'd made it home. Later that evening, she went back to the range. Just to watch. No weapon, no lane reservation, just presence. The range officer gave her a quiet nod. She nodded back. From a bench in the back, she watched others shoot. A young woman, maybe late 20s, was struggling with her stance. Too stiff, trying too hard. Sarah smiled. Not long ago, that had been her. Not in technique, but in doubt. Eventually, the woman lowered her weapon, frustrated. She turned to leave. Sarah stepped forward. "Mind if I show you something?" The woman paused, then nodded. Sarah moved slowly, gently correcting her grip, adjusting her elbow. "Let your breath lead the shot," she said. "Not your fear." The woman blinked, then fired. The shot rang out, cleaner than before. Not perfect, but better. The woman turned. "Thanks." Sarah just smiled. "Anytime." As she left the range that night, the stars were out. She paused under one, the brightest in the sky. Somewhere out there, 100 ghosts still walked with her. She didn't fear them anymore. They were part of her, proof that she had once stood. In places no one else dared to go, proof that she had made it back, not untouched, but unbroken. And maybe that was the point. Back at home, her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. No greeting, no explanation. Just a quote. "Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." She stared at it for a long time, then typed back. "Sometimes, the strongest trigger pull is choosing not to fire." She hit send, set the phone down, and sat in stillness, not combat stillness. Not sniper stillness, peaceful stillness, the kind you earn. The kind you don't always recognize when it arrives. But when it does, outside, Denver kept moving, and inside, Sarah Martinez, ghost, sat alone, but not lonely, still present home. Because, in the end, the war hadn't left her, and maybe it never would. But it had taught her the most sacred lesson of all. You're not what the war made you. You're what you become afterward. The end.